Welcome to the live stream, y'all. Just doing a little experiment, just trying to see what we can do right here. Mic check 1 2 1 2. So let's take a look at some MMA news that's going on in the world of MMA right now. So let's see here. Corey Anderson reveals big differences between fighter treatment in Bellator versus the UFC. This kind of goes into this aspect of what a lot of people are thinking about with Francis's comments, saying that the UFC doesn't really care about them or doesn't really have any particular inclination of trying to negotiate with them in any kind of capacity. It's just one of these situations where you take it as it is, and there's really nothing that you can do about it. You see, one of the reasons why Francis right now is not in the UFC is not just because of fighter pay, but the other aspect of it also deals with just the type of negotiating leverage that he wants. Now, he obviously wants the type of leverage where he can create some kind of situation of, let's say, having executive rights, having uh, health care for all the other fighters. And on top of that, just feeling like a person and not just another number as another employee of some sort. Let's play what Anderson, well, okay, this is a bit long and I don't want to get copyrighted on this one, but let me just read to you what he basically wrote right here from courtesy of MMAnews.com. So Bellator light heavyweight contender Corey Anderson is happy to embark on his current stage of his career with the promotions that he was embraced. Anderson faced another UFC veteran, Phil Davis, at Bellator 297 this weekend in Chicago. He returns to avenge his loss to the Bellator light heavyweight champion Vadim Nemkov and get back in the thick of things in 205. Anderson has found a lot of success in Bellator since his split with the UFC. After a loss to Jan Blachowicz, who later became the UFC undisputed light heavyweight champion, Anderson earned three straight knockout wins, including wins over Bellator heavyweight champion Ryan Bader. Before his UFC tenure concluded, Anderson had a history of gripes with the promotion's upper class. This includes UFC President Dana White, who clashed with Anderson when it came to his preferred timing for the light heavyweight title shot. Amidst of the aftermath of Francis Ngannou's deal, which I just referenced, you guys, many fighters have shared their personal experiences with dealing with the UFC outside the cage. Now, Anderson, who has wins over the likes of Glover Teixeira and Johnny Walker in the UFC, is thankful to be part of a family-orientated promotion like Bellator. And that's kind of what I mean when I said that they treat him more as a human being rather than just as an employee that is just another number on their situation, right? Let's see what else here. Uh, when I look back at it, it was kind of like a penitentiary over there. This is what Anderson explained in his situation with the UFC. Cellmate number. What's your number? You're known by a number. You're not known by a name. They know your name, but unless you're Conor McGregor, John Jones, someone else exciting, they won't really care. Now, to push back on that a little bit, I kind of have to make Corey Anderson understand that it is a business. And this is one of the things that a lot of people who have this mentality of, well, this is all about fighting. This is all about the honor of martial arts. This is all about the competitive architecture and the meritocracy of martial arts. Well, unfortunately, that's not true when you're dealing with the UFC, which is a big global business. And what is their ethos really predicated on as far as the UFC is concerned? Well, I got to say, what they're predicated on is just nothing more than just the reality of a business that is tied to entertainment. And now more than ever, in the fact that they have the WWE as their merger and all these other entities that they have to deal with Disney, and then let's say ESPN and all these things that come across that. So overall, I've said this plenty of times before, and I've said this in the particular episode that I did with the tie-in booth Nunce Gate scandal situation. And I was basically trying to explain that when you're trying to attract casuals on an everyday or sorry, on an every weekend basis on a Saturday, what you're doing is you're trying to take them out of whatever schedule or routine they have going on in their weekend lives, of whether that would be going to a ball game or going to the club or going out to restaurants or going out to family theme parks and things of that nature. You got to get these people, what I would call the normies of the world, into this atmosphere of a Saturday night fight, right? And you just can't do that with guys that just want to be martial artists or guys that just want to be a fighter and nothing more and nothing less and don't want to promote themselves. So that's kind of the only thing that I have to push back on when it comes to the statements of Corey Anderson. But nonetheless, let's continue on. As for Bellator, I've seen them with a kid in their second pro fight get on the card, and they deal with them the same way that they deal with me when I fought for the title. Everybody gets the same treatment. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're selling tickets, main event, you're a person. They are going to treat you like who you are, and everything gets handled well during fight week. Now, after his split from the UFC, Ngannou made similar comments and took specific issues with the UFC brass to approach contract negotiations. Ngannou is expected to make his PFL debut next year after his planned boxing debut in 2023. Anderson is part of the Bellator roster that is arguably one of the best that has ever seen, led by top fighters like Nemkov, Johnny Eblen, Anderson. Yeah, just kind of add on that. Yes, I think that Bellator does have a case to say that they do have some of the best fighters in the world. Johnny Eblen, their current 185 champion right now, currently undefeated, trains with America Top Team, some of the best guys in the world. Nemkov, the same thing, one of the best 205ers in the world, can easily translate into the UFC and beat any of the top five guys out there, and trains with legends like Fedor and whatnot. And so, moving on with the article, Anderson has a chance to add his name to the mix if he can exact his revenge against Nemkov. Okay, so Anderson's comments about the UFC are staggering. Granted, the promotion's public feuds with some of its former fighters, he's looking to prove that the UFC's decision to part ways with him was a mistake, as he remains in the physical prime of his career. And that's basically the end of that article. So moving on with other articles out there in the UFC or in the MMA space, Russian promotions mixes Mortal Kombat and MMA in a bizarre tournament format. Okay, let's take a look at this. What is this about? So Official Game has mixed the fight business with pleasure. Hardcore gamers who fancy scraps can fulfill both passions thanks to a unique promotion. Physical Game mixes virtual and physical realities to create competitive environments for gamers and athletes. As technology continues to evolve, more promotions like Fishbowl Games could host mainstream events. Fishbowl Games recently hosted its seventh event in Russia, this time featuring a slew of mixed martial arts prospects around the region. Similar to the PFL format, fighters are rewarded points for finishes and fights won by decisions in a tournament format. Okay, so continuing on, fighters competed in Mortal Kombat before squaring off inside the cage. Mortal Kombat is arguably the most popular video game franchise of all time and the newest game to launch on September 19th. Mortal Kombat is a common favorite amongst MMA fighters. UFC contender heavyweight Curtis Blades walks out to it in his appearances in the octagon. Now, it's hard to tell where a Physical Games goes from here, but it could be a hybrid to watch as MMA continues to garner popularity around the world. In addition to fighting, the organization also hosted events centered around hockey, soccer, laser tag, and karting. Okay, so they're trying to do something a little bit creative. They're adding EA Sports, or I'm sorry, EA Games, to basically add on to fighting, I guess. And then I don't know how that's going to translate in reality, right? I mean, I get that there's a niche for that in, let's say, Russia or maybe even in Japan or things of that nature, but I'm going to be a little bit more skeptical in how the American fans are going to somehow take into that, right? If that's something that is really popular in the UFC model. Now, Dana White has always mentioned that he doesn't like all these extravagant things to go on with the show, right? And talking about the UFC's production and whatnot. unless of course you're Conor McGregor in that time where he had Chad Mendez and Conor McGregor in UFC 189, where it was supposed to be Jose Aldo fighting in that card, but he got injured and then later moved on to fight down the line in the winter of 2015. So uh, Chad Mendes walked out to Aaron Lewis, who was the Stained lead singer, and sung him out to the song Country Boy, which is a common song that Chad Mendes usually walks out to. And then Conor McGregor was sung out by none other than Irish legend Sinead O'Connor. Now, when that happened, it was like Dana White breaking his own rules of not being so extravagant. But I guess certain situations calls for certain measures and certain ways of, I guess, going about, uh, doing a show, right? So certainly Dana White's not going to be in the business of doing EA Sports games and then mixing it with a mixed martial arts event, although it's not out of the ethos of the UFC to promote other brands and other promotions such as slap fighting, such as different entities of, let's say, grappling competitions that they have on UFC Fight Pass. They got all these kickboxing fights that they have going on there at the same time. But if it's just the UFC pay per view and it's just their show alone, it's just not something that they're going to do. Now, other companies, they have to be different than the UFC, such as ONE FC. They have to do things a lot differently. KSW, they have to do things a lot differently as well. They do stadium fights now during the time that they had, I guess, what was it, like 2 weeks ago when they had their own show going on in KSW up in Poland. So these are the different things that I guess you can look forward to in terms of the different promotions out there and how they're going to try to be different than the bland situation that they have in the UFC. And I guess it's just the way that the UFC does things. They're just going to keep it nice and simple. And let's face it, they have those three letters that help them monopolize the entire mixed martial arts game. So yeah, moving on to the news, we have Amanda Nunes, as you guys know, has recently just retired from the game of mixed martial arts. And UFC legend Amanda Nunes showing off her collections of the championship belts just days after the UFC 289 Swan Song. Nunes put on a dominant performance against Irene Aldana in her recent bantamweight title defense at UFC 289. She didn't lose a single round on all three of the judges' scorecards and cemented her status as arguably the greatest female MMA fighter of all time. Now, after earning a dominant win, Nunes puts her gloves on and belts on the canvas and announcing her retirement. The 35-year-old departs as a two-division champion with a slew of memorable moments inside the octagon. So, again, a lot of people are not too happy about Amanda Nunes retiring because you got to take into consideration, right? In this game, people want to see you fail. They don't want to see you do good. They don't want to see anybody leave on top. And I think there's a good reason why that is. Okay. And I think the reason why that is because you got to understand that when we're kids, you ever built a tower with dominoes or Legos, and then when you stack it really high, what happens in the end? Well, what happens in the end is you end up knocking it down because it's just human nature inside of us to want to get rid of these things because I don't know, we just like to see things get knocked down. We like to see things get built up, but we also like to see things get knocked down. And I think it's just a common trend with champions from the past and present and what they have to deal with. Because when you have a situation where you're a dominant champion and you're winning, eventually people are going to want to see you fail, right? So if other people want to see you fail, well, what are you going to do? Right? That's just the way that the world is. They want to see you fail because they don't want to constantly see you win. But when you're a failure, or when you're on your way up, or when you're on your way of becoming a winner, or when you're trying to get to the top, people for some reason root for you, at least for the most part, right? They, like, for example, take Conor McGregor. Now, I know a lot of this is self-induced in his actions and the way that he lost a lot of Irish fans and support over the years. But just imagine this, right? When he started from the beginning, everybody was behind him, or at least there was a good following of people that was right behind Conor McGregor. Now, the issue with that is that he was in a situation where, I guess, he did a lot of off-putting things during the Khabib fight, and then on top of that, he has all these allegations behind him, which a lot of them are just really unthinkable and unspeakable to every degree. And it's hard to root for a guy like that. So now it's like we kind of enjoy seeing Conor McGregor get knocked down, right? With this Michael Chandler fight, it's like a car crash that we're all waiting to see at some point. But the reality is that no matter what, if you're a fighter that has had support from the beginning, okay, there's a good chance that later on those people are just going to turn on you. It's a very fickle game, just like the rap game, right? Like, how many people do you see in that game in particular make it to the top, but then eventually, once they get all the platinum records, they got all the awards from the Grammys, from BET, from MTV awards, and all that, all of a sudden you're like, this guy's whack, he's no good anymore. It's kind of like what happens in the whole hardcore scene that you see in music, right? You see in punk rock music, right? At some point, the Ramones were considered like this hardcore darling to all the punk rock niche enthusiasts. Same thing with Metallica. They were like looked at as this great band of hardcore metal. And then eventually they just felt like these guys went corporate. So then a certain niche group of people in the hardcore metal scene were just not filling them anymore. And the same thing you could say about 50 Cent at some point. And then you could say the same thing about Takashi 69, which, once again, very similar to Conor McGregor, was nothing more than just a self-induced PR disaster for his brand. But that's what's going on in the world of MMA right now. What else is coming up in UFC in terms of the fight nights they have going on, right? So we had Amanda Nunes versus Irene Aldana in the last pay-per-view, and of course, Amanda Nunes came out on top with a 5-round decision. Charles Oliveira was able to knock out Beneil Dariush, which really surprised everybody. And then Mike Malott came in with a submission win over Adam Fouget, just really cementing himself as the Canadian Michael Chandler, which is something a lot of people love to call him nowadays. And then Dan Ige comes out with a decision win over Nate Landier, who, by the way, is this prospect that is coming up. And Dan Ige is this guy that's been somewhat of a gatekeeper in this division and comes out on top with a decision. Another decision win as well for Mike Andre over Eric Anders. And then moving on to the card, we had earlier in the night Steve Erceg taking on David Drovak, which is really interesting because this is his debut, and he came in here winning against a ranked opponent, which is really impressive in and of itself, right? Diane Belabita wins by decision as well. A lot of decisions in this particular card. You had Nazardine Imavov and Chris Curtis, a real lackluster fight, right? Because Chris Curtis got headbutted and then he said that he wasn't able to see. And of course, they just had to rule it a no contest. So maybe somewhere down the line, they can try to somehow get this card going again, or get this particular fight going in some other fight card. Miranda Maverick loses to Jasmine with a decision loss. Ayman Zahabi comes in here with a knockout win over Aurori. and then Kyle Nelson gets a decision, and I think that is it for the particular prelims in that. So wasn't really the most exciting card going in. And of course, there were a lot of exciting things that were going in. This is the great thing that you can always really expect from the UFC, right? Is a situation where if they're going to have a lackluster card from the beginning, you will always leave with something to take out of it in one of those 11 fights. Meaning that in this particular card, you had a lot of decisions, a lot of lackluster wins, a lot of really unexciting matchups going in. But by the end of it all, what you got was somewhat of an exciting card because the UFC just builds its market to be that way. And now that the week of that card is particularly over, now here we are. We're moving to June 17th. We have Marvin Vettori taking on Jared Cannonier, and I believe this is going to be in the Apex Las Vegas card, I believe. And so the co-main event for this one is top lightweight contender Arman Sarukian, one of the guys that gave Islam Makhachev one of the toughest fights of his career. And it was his debut in the UFC for Arman Sarukian. He takes on Joaquim Silva for the co-main event. Armin Petrosian, one of the top middleweights that's coming up right now. He's going to be fighting Christian Leroy Duncan, which is a former Cage Warriors champion, one of those talents that they picked up in those particular regions of the UK, and in that particular regional promotion, Cage Warriors, which, as you've seen, has been making their rounds about in Southern California now, featuring some San Diego and SoCal fighters in their promotion. He takes on Christian Leroy Duncan, who was a former champion in that particular promotion, and that's going to be a good fight for fight card. And again, it's a card that a lot of people are going to sleep on. They always sleep on these fight nights, but I tell you what, some of these fight nights are the gems of the UFC. And why do I say that? Because these guys are what makes the future pay-per-view fights later down the road. Think about this. When Islam Makhachev took on Bobby Green in the Apex Center, did we ever imagine that at some point Islam Makhachev was going to make a big pay-per-view show with Volkanovski? Was that ever something that was in the mix of our minds when all of that was going on? No, of course not. So yes, the casuals are going to look down upon these fight night cards, but these cards are the backbone of the UFC. And then moving on, you have Pat Sabatini taking on Lucas Almeida at the featherweight division. Manuel Torres taking on Nicholas Mota in the lightweight division. And then you have a great welterweight matchup right here in Nicholas Dalby taking on Muslim Salikov. That guy is a kung fu master, has great spinning back kick, spinning attacks, a Dagestani fighter with striking skills. That's always interesting and always fun to watch. And in the prelims, you have Ronnie Barsalis taking on Miles Johns, Jimmy Flick taking on Alexandro Costa, Kang Kwong Ho taking on Christian Coinez, flyweight division, Carlos Hernandez taking on Dennis Bondar. And then you have in the flyweight division, Zagalis Zumolovov taking on Felipe Bones. And then in the flyweight division, you have Teresa Blade taking on Gabriel Fernandez. Dan Arguta taking on Ronnie Lawrence in the bantamweight division. And in the light heavyweight division, you have Zach Poalga taking on Modakis Bukakis, who, by the way, came in I believe the Perth UFC card as a replacement, and went in there and beat Tyson Pedro, and then to come back in this card and to basically redeem himself all over again. So this is going to be great for the weekend. I mean, again, it's just another fight night, but hey, like I said, these fight nights are exactly what they are. They are the backbone of the UFC in that, right? And then right after that week, you have Josh Emmett taking on Ila Tapora in another Apex card. And then after that, you have Sean Strickland taking on Abus Magomedov. And then right after that, you have International Fight Week with Alexander Volkanovski taking on Yair Rodriguez as they unify the 145 division. And then in the co-main event, you have Brendan Moreno taking on Alexander Pantoja for the co-main event. And then you have Robert Whittaker taking on Dricus du Plessis. Look, here's the thing about this fight, right? We're all excited to potentially see Israel Adesanya take on Dricus du Plessis. The problem is, will Dricus du Plessis pull this off or not? Because there's a possibility that he's not going to be able to pull it off. We have to take that into consideration, right? But the way that Israel Adesanya was saying in the Ariel Helwani interview today, he's really adamant in wanting to see Dricus du Plessis do good in this fight because there's a storyline there. There's controversies that deal with racial implications there. Dricus du Plessis saying that Francis Ngannou, no, not Francis Ngannou, Israel Adesanya and Kamaru Usman are not real Africans, whereas he was a real African because he fought and trained out of South Africa. And then the words that Israel Adesanya called him, the C word, called him a cracker while he was on his own YouTube channel with his brother David Adesanya. And it was just a great way to build this fight if Dricus du Plessis can actually pull it off against Robert Whittaker. A lot of people don't think that he can pull this off against Robert Whittaker. I mean, Robert Whittaker is one of the top fighters in the world, and he's been in there with Israel Adesanya. And if he wins, guess what? He's just going to clog up the division at the 185 mark. Same thing at the 155 mark. I think we all were hoping that Beneil Dariush was going to do this one. And the reason why we were really hoping for that is just for the simple fact that, well, we knew that if he wasn't going to be able to do that, he was just going to somehow really clog up the division. And now we kind of see that come to fruition, right? Now that he won, we're talking about Islam Makhachev taking on Charles Oliveira for the second time, even though we've seen the first fight was as dominant as the way that it was. So I don't know, man. Not exactly the best of choices, is it? But nonetheless, that's the way that fighting sports goes, right? It's not about any fairy tale or perfect storylines that's going to get Dricus du Plessis in there. I mean, if he loses his fight, realistically, you could just really say goodbye to the chance of being a 185 champion, let alone having this super fight storyline with Israel Adesanya. Because Robert Whittaker is just that good. Charles Oliveira is just that good. And there's a reason why these guys are going to continue to be a staple in that particular weight class for a long, long time. So that's the way that it goes. That's combat sports in a nutshell. Moving on. Let's see. Yeah, you got Jalen Turner and Dan Hooker in that card as well. And then, of course, you got Bo Nickel taking on Tresean Gore, which is, I mean, let's call it what it is. It's a highlight fight for Bo Nickel to take this guy down in the first round and submit him, because that's just what we know Bo Nickel to be. And then eventually after this, I think they're just going to give him a ranked opponent or somebody within the top 10, top 5 of some sort to just really fast track him. And, well, the likes of Robert Whittaker and Dricus du Plessis are going to have to look at the likes of Bo Nickel going up into that particular weight class. So as we move on, after that particular fight week, you're going to have Holly Holmes headline her own fight night card. That's probably going to be another Vegas Apex card. And then after that week, you have Tom Aspinall taking on Marcin Tybura in July 22nd. I believe the July 22nd card is going to be a London card. And Tom Aspinall looks like he's been headlining these cards as of late. And we'll see how he's going to rise up to the ranks after that lackluster loss that he had against Curtis Blades. And then, of course, we saw Curtis Blades lose his last fight to Sergey Pavlovich. And the heavyweight division in the UFC is moving on right now. right? And then Myson Tarbora has a chance to stop Tom Aspinall's hype, and Tom Aspinall has the chance to continue the hype that he has going on. Tom Aspinall's got great jiu-jitsu. He has fought I'm sorry, not fought. He's sparred with the likes of Tyson Fury in a boxing gym, so he's got great hands, and you've seen how that translates in the cage. So that's going to be an interesting London card right there. We'll see how that card fills out all throughout this entire week or this entire month or so. As the time goes on, they're going to try to put on all these other London guys in that card. And then moving on, UFC 291, the BMF belt, Dustin Poirier taking on Justin Gaethje. And then you have Jan Blachowicz taking on Alex Pereira after Alex Pereira had that loss against Israel Adesanya for the 185 title. Tony Ferguson taking on Bobby Green. Is that a good matchup? I'd say so, but better for Bobby Green. It's one of those situations where Tony Ferguson at any given time would have beaten Bobby Green, but this is not the same Tony Ferguson as it once was. So it'll be interesting to see where that matchup goes. Paulo Costa taking on Ikram El-Kheer. This was supposed to be a match that I believe was for Khamzat Chimaev. Now, interestingly enough, Ikram was knocked out by Khamzat in Brave FC in one of their regional cards that they fought up in Bahrain. So here he is. He's now fighting in the middleweight division of the UFC. He's no slouch by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, just because he got knocked out by Khamzat, right? He's still one of the top fighters in the world, and he's going to show to prove that by taking on a former contender straight away into his career. So sort of a fast track for Ikram, but of course it's one of those situations where he either has to sink or swim now. And then you have Stephen Thompson taking on Michael Pereira. A great matchup with two elusive guys. It's going to be a real fun striking matchup. Then you have Derek Lewis taking on Marcus Rodrigo de Lima. Michael Chiesa taking on Kevin Holland. That's going to be a great fight. Trevin Giles, the Houston Police Department officer, taking on Gabriel Botham, who's undefeated, 14-0. Matthew Schlemberger taking on Johan Lianis, and then Roman Kopylov taking on Claudio Ribeiro at the middleweight division. CJ Vererga taking on Vincius Salvador at the flyweight division. And then you have Joan Calderwood fighting unknown. Not, it's literally like not listed. But then after that, you have a fight night card in August 12th with Vicente Luque taking on Rafael dos Santos. That's going to be a good one. Khalil Roundtree takes on Chris Dukakis in the co-main event of that particular card. And then right after that, you have UFC 292 in Boston against Aljamain Sterling and Sean O'Malley. Now, this is going to be in Boston. Sean O'Malley has that Irish thing going on. You can bet that it's going to be a big crowd for Sean O'Malley, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of fans for Aljo there as well. But again, it's Boston. You never know. I mean, there is always that racial implication that goes into it too. You guys know Boston. I grew up in New Jersey in the Northeast. You guys understand the political dynamics of that particular part of the world. I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to boo Aljamain Sterling just based on racial implications. And then in that co-main event, you have Wei Li Zhang taking on Amanda Lemos. And speaking of racial implications, I mean, she's been in cards in Florida where she got booed just for the reason of her being Chinese. But at least that's what is according to Luke Thomas. Now, take that as you will. And then you have Chris Weidman in that card taking on Brad Tavares. And so far, that's all you have that goes on into that particular fight card. And the cards that they're going to try to make from, let's say, September all the way to October, November, and then possibly the Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler fight that they're going to try to make in December, if and when that possibly happens. But of course, the UFC is always going to try to keep you on your toes and your heels, and you never know when these fights are going to come about. But that's just the way that it is, right? When Khabib and Conor were going to fight back in 2013, they kind of hinted that they weren't going to do that fight, and then somewhere down the line they kind of kept it a secret for everybody, and then later on just basically revealed that it was what they were going to do. And then they announced it, I think, during one of these press conferences, and yeah, and then that was that. So what else? Jorge Masvidal reveals his highest career UFC payday very well taken care of. Juliana Pena declares Amanda Nunes is dead to me after. Oh, okay. So basically, Juliana Pena is not too happy with Amanda Nunes retiring. But hey, look, that's just the way that it is. I'm sure Khabib, uh, when he retired, I'm sure Conor McGregor wasn't too happy either. If you guys remember, in the documentary of McGregor Forever in Netflix, he sort of showed his disdain towards Khabib for leaving after the Justin Gaethje fight. But that's just the way that it goes, right? Everyone's career trajectory is different in the fight game. You know, everybody is going to fight all the way till they can't fight anymore, and then there's just some guys that are just going to not fight anymore after they just beat everybody. It's just the way that it goes. But one thing you got to understand, right? While these guys and these gals are still in the top of their prime and the top of their years, and are still competing and uh, doing their thing right now, we have to appreciate them because, hey, guess what? You know, this game is not forever. And because it's not forever, it's temporary. So we can only enjoy them for their time being and what they're doing right now. So that's all that I got for this particular late night stream. Enjoy the fights. All right, so check this out, right? They have UFC 293 just recently announced for Sydney, Australia. And one would have to wonder, who are they going to put in that card? Are they going to put Israel Adesanya in that card? That is highly likely. Now, against who? Will it be against Dricus du Plessis? Oh, most definitely they're going to do Dricus du Plessis if there is a good chance that, let's say, he beats Robert Whitaker. And suppose that, let's say, Robert Whitaker pulls off a win against Dricus du Plessis, which is something that a lot of the conventional minded MMA fans are saying is going to happen. Guess what? There might add Israel Adesanya and Robert Whitaker once again. Because look, here's the thing, right? A lot of people are dreading the fact that, let's say, possibly that Israel Adesanya and Robert Whitaker could happen once again for the third time. They're dreading the idea of this happening. Well, the second fight around, it looked pretty close, right? And some will argue that Robert Whitaker won that. And then some will say that, well, he didn't. But he was very close. So you got to think there's a good reason and a possibility that he could possibly pull this one off or not. But nonetheless, having Robert Whitaker and Israel Adesanya isn't the worst thing in the world. Or maybe that's just another way of coping with the idea that, like, you know what? This is just what we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to deal with a clogged division. So moving on from that, you have UFC 293, and in UFC 294, you have Abu Dhabi, which isn't really announced or hasn't really been given any cards yet, just like with UFC 293. Uh, it's going to be in Abu Dhabi. Who's going to be in that one? You could say Charles Oliveira, maybe taking on Islam Makhachev. But then a lot of people are just saying, I mean, do we really want to see that again? Again, another situation where you have a clogged division. Maybe I should do a video on that. What do you guys think? Maybe do a video on the clogged divisions within the 155 and 185 divisions that's going on right now. And that in particular being made by none other than Charles Oliveira and Robert Whitaker, right? Because they're just so good. They're at the top of their game right now. What can you possibly do? There's not much that you can really do with that, right? I mean, they're bound to beat everybody. But then the guys that are on top right now, Israel Adesanya and Islam Makhachev in their respective divisions, they're just going to beat everybody. And there's not going to be anybody that comes close, maybe other than Robert Whitaker, obviously, with the second fight around. Now, with the second fight that him and Izzy are going to have, you never know what's going to happen. But when it comes to Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira, it's like as if we already know and seen what had happened. And how can we even really think that anything different is going to happen after this? We just can't. So, remains to be seen. That's the best way to really put it, right? And then fight night, they're going to have a fight night in Sao Paulo, Brazil, sometime in November, which is going to lead them to their New York November card of 2023 at some point. So yeah, those are the fights that they have going on that they're trying to make in the UFC at the current moment of time. So let's see what else is going on in the world of boxing at the current moment, right? Let's take a look at some upcoming matchups that they have in boxing. We know that Tyson Fury, we don't really know what's going on with him or what he's got going on. We don't really know what's going on with Usyk or what he's going to do, or Anthony Joshua. And then in the mix of that, you have Francis Ngannou trying to throw his hat in there with all these top boxing names that he wants to throw under, get some fights under or something like that for his debut. But nonetheless, this is what we have going on for the boxing side of things, right? Again, not the biggest matchups or whatever, but hey, you know what? For all my boxing aficionados out there, I'm sure you're going to appreciate this one right here, right? So June 16th, coming up this Friday in New York Hall, you have Fraser Clark taking on Mariusz Wach. Regis Prograis getting back up there against Liam Aparo. Tim Zhu taking on Carlos Ocampo. Carlos Adames versus Julian Williams. Edgar Berlanga comes back in action against Jason Quigley. And Kazuta Ayoka taking on Joshua Franco. Dalton Smith taking on Sam Maxwell. Franchon Cruz Derzon taking on Savannah Marshall. Jared Anderson coming back in action in Ohio against Zahn. Diego Pacho taking on Manuel Gallegos, and that's going to be in Monterrey, Mexico. That's going to be on July 7th. Virgil Ortiz taking on Imantas Tanios. Jaron Ennis comes back on July 8th, taking on Romain Villa, and that's the same day as UFC International Fight Week. Josh Kelly comes back and takes on Gabriel Corzo. Alicia Baumgartner taking on Christina Liron Nardato. George Kambosos takes on Maxie Hughes. Stephen Fulton taking on Iona Inoue, which is a big one that everybody is waiting for. And that's a Tuesday fight. Very unusual that they have these fights going on a Tuesday, but hey, you know what? It's always good to have all these different fights in different times of the week. They always say that, hey, you know what? The weekends are for the brokies, right? Because everybody is out on the weekends filling up the balls, clogging up the spaces and things of that nature. And whereas the ballers, they shop and do their things on the weekdays. So this is, I guess, one of those things in that situation, but whatever. Liam Davis taking on Jason Cunningham in the UK. Errol Spence Jr., Terrence Crawford right there for July 29th. And then a week right after, you have Jake Paul taking on Nate Diaz. And by the way, interesting about that, Ness from the Boxing Voice mentioned that he's seen Nate Diaz spar in Las Vegas because now, as you guys know, he lives out in Vegas. So he sees all these guys that are boxing and sparring each other. So yeah, he said that Nate Diaz is going to get bodied. That's going to be really interesting to see if that is the case, right? Because, I mean, Jake Paul has proven that he's a formidable boxer, right? Somebody that has really taken this craft really seriously and has honed his skills. Well, now he's going to take on Nate Diaz and kind of pushing his competition down a notch because we've seen him go up against Tommy Fury, a guy who has incredible arm reach for somebody who's only 6 feet tall, right? But then you have this situation where now you have him taking on Nate Diaz back at it with the MMA fighters again. And then Emmanuel Navarrete taking on Oscar Valdez. And then the highly anticipated matchup for the hardcores, Arthur Beterbiev versus Callum Smith. Now, what about Arthur Beterbiev? This guy has a 100% knockout ratio. Nobody in boxing can say that. And I just can't see how Callum Smith is going to do anything different. But hey, it's the theater of the unknown, and you never know what you're going to get out of these fights, right? So that's all that we have for all the upcoming fights and matchups for the world of boxing and MMA. Let's take a look at some rankings for boxing right now, pound for pound. Number one, as of, well, this was updated, they said in December 22. Okay. So Inoue is the number one pound for pound at the moment. Alexander Usyk, Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence, and then you got Dimitri Bivol, Saul Canelo Alvarez, Jermell Charlo, Tyson Fury right below all of them. That's interesting. Devin Haney at number 9, and then Juan Francisco Estrada at number 10. Okay, so that's really interesting. So one thing that I'm really curious about is why isn't Arthur Beterbiev in this list? He has a 100% knockout ratio. I mean, is that political, or is it just because of the fact that how they do things in boxing? It's one of those situations where they're basically ranking people based on the names and resumes that they have going on. That could be a reality, but nonetheless, that is all that we have for this particular week of boxing and MMA. I'm going to come back with more maybe just take a small break from this right now, gather a few topics, and then go on from there.
Позиції де?
Та я понял, що
Оружие яке у вас?
ні,
отделение вообще в взводе, что у вас там? Отделение, отделение.
Миномет, РПГ.
Есть РПГ?
Какая техника?
And I was asked what John's greatest body of work was. John Jones is doing a signing at a grappling event. He's signing autographs. I mean, he'd been drinking the night before. It was clear. This is not anything more than I'm John Jones and you guys, somebody paid me some money and here I am. Let me get your autographs, put my time in and get out of here. A guy walked up and challenged him. And John Jones accepted, walked onto the mat with a brown belt, played with him like he was a child. There it comes. Let's watch a little bit. You see me come out the back? Did you see me come out the back? Huh? But you saw me let him pull my head down. You saw me let him get close. You saw me hand fight right, my little boy. Thank you, son. Thank you, son. I'm trying to prove a point. It's how that looks, right? That's what John did. And when people ask me what John's greatest performance was, it could be a stretch. I might not win that argument. But that's the example that I give. And I was asked what John's greatest body of work was.
If you're great women, why is that okay?
Why is it okay for women to say, oh, you're 5 feet on dating sites? You should be dead? That's okay?
Who said that to you here? Nobody.
Women in general have said it on dating sites. You think I'm making that shit up? Everywhere I go, I get the same fucking smirk with the biting lip. Shut your mouth. You're not God or my father or my boss. Dude, you want to step outside?
I just don't understand how you find somebody guilty of doing something to a 15-day-old baby because there was no evidence whatsoever that proved anything about me putting my hands on my kids. I've never done it. I never would. I don't believe in it.
Oh, yeah, man. Check this bad boy out. Standard manufacturing, the Jackal. You see it? Little P22, man. Little 22 long rifle, man. Threaded barrel. Picatinny rail. Man, look like some futuristic stuff. All right. Right, standard manufacturing. I see you. I see you. Oh, yeah, this thing pretty light, too. I can see it. Cutting up with this little thing. No, ain't got no kind of recoil. Oh, man, I got to go get right, though, man. All these threaded barrels I got to start getting right, man. What y'all think about that, man? The Jackal. Huh? Nice and light, man. 22. I know this thing for him. I already know. No question.
Russian Telegram channels are leaking that Russian flanks in Bakhmut are really weak. Bakhmut itself is strong, but Russian flanks are weak, and Ukrainians are using those weaknesses, striking the flanks. Now, we have information that Russians are gathering a lot of reserves to defend Bakhmut, the city, not the flanks for some reason. A lot of reserves moving into this area. Russians cannot lose Bakhmut because they lost so many troops, equipment, so many offensive capabilities. To take this settlement, it was a political order, and losing.
Did you hear about the last tweet McGregor did with Khabib?
No.
Yeah, because Khabib had mentioned, and if you don't mind me talking about it.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, Khabib had mentioned it's like it's good over evil when he was fighting Poirier, when McGregor fought Poirier, and he says good will always prevail. And then Connor's crazy ass, he wrote is like, yeah man, it's good versus evil, and then he said something about along the lines that kind of COVID kind of took your dad in that sense. Like going below the belt, you know what I'm saying? Like completely. But something that I will say about that, your dad has always said that at one point, he would invite Conor McGregor to a barbecue, man.
No, it's like my dad was like different level, about like this situation. He always like his heart was like so like clean, and it's like when he talk about this. Only evil can talk about your.
Did you hear about the last tweet McGregor did with Khabib?
No.
Yeah, because Khabib had mentioned, and if you don't mind me talking about it.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, Khabib had mentioned it's like it's good over evil when he was fighting Poirier, when McGregor fought Poirier, and he says good will always prevail. And then Connor's crazy ass, he wrote is like, yeah man, it's good versus evil, and then he said something about along the lines that kind of COVID kind of took your dad in that sense, like going below the belt, you know what I'm saying? Like completely. But something that I will say about that, your dad has always said that at one time.
Drop the act, bro. We're gonna turn you.
What does that mean?
You're 15.
I'm 15, yeah.
No, you're not.
Well, I mean, I was born in 2002, so I mean, it adds up.
When's your full birthday?
April 23rd,
2003.
3.
You wouldn't be 15. You'd be 20.
No.
Yes.
Well, 2007.
When were you born, bro?
Well, I just gave you the real date. You can look it up online. They said he also said I'm worth like $10 million.
Drop the act, bro. We're gonna turn you.
What does that mean?
You're 15.
I'm 15, yeah.
No, you're not.
Well, I mean, I was born in 2002, so I mean, it adds up.
When's your full birthday?
April 23rd.
2000.
that's a, a likely scenario that that's not going to happen. But at the same time, it's also highly unlikely that it's going to happen maybe for Francis Ngannou and Deontay Wilder as well, because you got to understand, right? You know, Deontay Wilder has some really difficult people to deal with when it comes to signing these fights, right? Obviously, he didn't have much difficulty with Tyson Fury. He did, however, have a lot of difficulties making that fight with Anthony Joshua. But why is that? Why is it that he didn't really have a lot of difficulty making that fight with Tyson Fury? Well, you got to take into consideration the shape that Tyson Fury was at in that particular moment of time wasn't really all that great. He was easy pickings. He was somebody that Deontay Wilder could easily exploit as somebody that was coming off of this binge of overeating, overindulgence of drugs, and all these different situations that Tyson Fury had going on in his life. But by the end of the day, I mean, he thought wrong, and he well he got beat by Tyson Fury in multiple occasions to prove that he was just the better boxer. And he wasn't easy pickings from the beginning in any stretch of the imagination. Now with Tyson Fury and John Jones, I think they're just talking right now. This is just one of those situations where it is what it is. It's very similar to what happened with Izzy Stylebender when they had that little beef going on. They're going back and forth and this and that, and lo and behold, what happens? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They are now somewhat cordial with each other, or they respect each other, or respect their style or whatever, and then they just come to this realization that they're just never going to fight each other. But nonetheless, that's all I got, and I'm going to hit you guys off with this outro of a little bit of some music, and I hope you guys enjoyed the late night stream. That's all that I got for the night. Thank you. Bye.